RoboTaxi. In downtown San Francisco, something extraordinary has started appearing among the usual congestion of Uber, Lyft and taxi traffic. Sleek white autonomous vehicles emblazoned with the distinctive geometric logo silently roaming the streets to pick up passengers. These are the first public robot taxis from GM subsidiary Cruise, representing a milestone in commercializing one of the most hyped technologies of the modern era: self-driving ride-sharing services promising to upend urban mobility. After years of research, testing and billions in investment, Cruise has secured permits to launch its doorstep-to-doorstep driverless taxi experience to customers across a 30-square-mile operating area covering most of San Francisco. Using Cruise's smartphone app, residents can summon one of the all-electric Chevy Bolt EVs fitted with LiDAR, cameras and other sensors to navigate city streets without human drivers. It's the debut of an autonomous ride-sharing model that deeper-pocketed rivals like Waymo, Argo AI, and Cruise's own ultra-rich founder Kyle Voigt have long promised. Robotic taxis that could spark a revolution in mobility by eliminating personal car ownership, reducing traffic and emissions while providing accessibility to cheap on-demand transportation for everyone. And San Francisco may be just the opening salvo in a sweeping robotic transit disruption headed for major cities worldwide. This is truly a watershed moment that autonomous technology has been building towards, providing public access to fully driverless ride-sharing capabilities for the first time, said Arash Alipur, a professor at San Jose State University's Automation Engineering program. While the services will initially be limited and gradually expand from here, it's a pivotal milestone that signals we are crossing the Rubicon into a commercialized era of self-driving mobility. For San Franciscans, experiencing Cruise's robotic taxi service may simultaneously feel futuristic and familiar. Many aspects of the customer experience will resemble standard ride-sharing, from ordering rides on Cruise's app and getting picked up on urban streets to paying fares and rating vehicle quality. Where it will notably differ is in the driverless aspect. Users will be summoning fully autonomous Chevy Bolts lacking human safety operators inside. When the vehicle arrives, customers can use a PIN provided on the app to unlock the doors and input their destination before the RoboTaxi automatically proceeds on its route. While other autonomous delivery services are being piloted in select cities or suburban areas, Cruise's driverless ride-hailing program represents the first time the public can access such vehicles on demand and get ferried anywhere in a dense urban environment without human intervention or oversight. There's novel engineering challenges that make operating in complex city driving environments like San Francisco particularly demanding, handling intricate traffic patterns, roadwork, emergency vehicles and dense pedestrian areas, explained Matt Dillman, a former Cruise autonomous engineer. But this is ultimately the use case the technology has been aiming for: transporting people door to door through chaotic real-world conditions rather than simple highway scenarios. For users riding the largely unmarked autonomous Chevy Bolts beyond the Cruise logos, the experience should appear mostly similar to today's ride-shares. The self-driving taxis are operating conservatively at 30 miles per hour max in congested areas with interior cameras and sensors scanning for any conditions requiring smoother acceleration or emergency stops. Beyond a tablet providing route information, there's no special human monitoring or manual controls required. Passengers will likely notice the robotic drivers adopting more cautious safety gaps when trailing vehicles and taking more gradual turns through intersections as the programming prioritizes avoiding collisions over outright efficiency. Rides remain confined to the pre-mapped operating zone, targeting 80 to 90% of typical use cases in SF, avoiding directives to lower density peripheral areas. While innovative in its urban rollout, Cruise's autonomous rideshare service faces major challenges around affordability, scalability, and public acceptance. With only a modest 30-vehicle fleet approved for pickups from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in San Francisco initially, Cruise will almost certainly struggle with availability and wait times in meeting demand. This limited first deployment makes the robot access more of a novel tech demo than a truly disruptive mobility force, at least at launch. There's also major concerns around equitably pricing this premium self-driving service compared to cost-competitive alternatives. Cruise is cagey on current fares, though reports suggest rates could be 2 to 3 times higher than Uber/Lyft when factoring autonomous vehicle operating costs. That luxury price tag makes the technology more of a high-end niche rather than promising rideshare alternative for lower-income communities. It remains to be seen if Cruise can rapidly scale production and expand operations into neighborhoods outside downtown to reach broader adoption. But the bigger open question may be public comfort with driverless vehicles sharing roads with pedestrians and human-piloted cars after a slew of highly publicized accidents during testing. Professional observers at PAVE, a safety advocacy group, will be monitoring Cruise's every robotic maneuver in San Francisco for glitches or safety lapses. There's certainly understandable anxiety around driverless vehicles operating in such extreme density, said Nathaniel Buse from PAVE. If a robot rideshare hits a bicyclist or pedestrian when making an unprotected turn, you're not only dealing with a terrible crash, but a massive setback in public willingness to accept this technology as viable. Cruise may also soon find itself navigating a data privacy backlash from the cameras and sensors required to operate thousands of self-driving taxis in urban areas. Civil liberties groups have sounded early alarm bells about unauthorized street-level collection of personal movements, faces and behaviors enabled by the company's patrolling robotic fleet. The goal should be implementing automated mobility safely in cities, but not at the cost of needlessly surveilling our public spaces using these sensors. That would violate individual privacy rights on a massive scale simply to enable these autonomous vehicles, cautioned Albert Fox-Khan, founder of Sarvasi, an AI privacy organization. There's also fears about accumulated real-world data from these automated taxis being weaponized for commercial micro-targeting, getting swept up in law enforcement requests, or mishandled and breached in ways that erode people's right to anonymity in public spaces if proper privacy safeguards aren't strictly enforced. Once you let genie out of the bottle of granular surveillance under the guise of advancing self-driving tech, all sorts of pernicious tracking and monitoring potentials are unleashed, so the public must demand transparency and robust data protection measures, Khan added. Despite these obstacles, proponents see Cruise's RoboTaxi service as an important first step in realizing the transformative potential of autonomous mobility. Beyond just eliminating the drudgery, safety risks and costs of human-powered ride-sharing, fleets of driverless Uber bots could dramatically reshape urban transportation by slashing personal car ownership rates and congestion. With cheaper ride-sharing fares enabled by removing labor costs, some projections estimate demand increasing fourfold as transit becomes more accessible than owning a personal vehicle. That could usher an era of cities redesigned around pedestrian and cycling areas rather than traffic lanes. The electric robot axis could help accelerate emissions reductions and efforts tackling climate change. Increased mobility access via ride-sharing is seen as an equity enabler for underserved communities or disabled citizens lacking transportation options. The positive societal impacts can be so broad if we get this transition to automated mobility right, easing traffic, minimizing road deaths, reviving our public spaces, creating more affordable transportation, and boosting access and equity, said Raj Kumar, Director of Mobility and Autonomous Systems at Carnegie Mellon University. Cruise's service is an embryonic precursor of what could eventually unfold in cities shifting away from car-centered infrastructure towards more sustainable ecosystems leveraging driverless fleets. To realize that ambition, Cruise and autonomous vehicle peers must first prove they can reliably operate at scale in the grueling real-world conditions of complex urban environments. And in places like San Francisco, they'll be under intense scrutiny doing so. While this launch is just an initial rollout, it paves the way for Cruise and future competitors to start gathering the real-world experience necessary to iteratively improve their artificial intelligence systems behind safely handling every scenario driverless vehicles may encounter. If successful, they'll demonstrate it's feasible to eventually expand into providing efficient, affordable, and convenient transportation alternatives at a wide scale. Looking ahead, driverless robot axis are viewed as just the opening salvo, with e-commerce deliveries, automated trucking and even mass transit solutions like self-driving buses and micro-shuttles poised to follow as the technology matures. San Francisco residents will be at the forefront of this societal shift, essentially serving as opt-in urban guinea pigs helping vet the viability of driverless mobility for the rest of the world. Their willingness to embrace or reject robot ride-sharing could determine how rapidly the technology progresses and scales across other cities and markets. By allowing early public access and gathering that real-world operational data, Cruise is truly putting their systems to the ultimate test against the chaos of everyday city streets filled with unpredictable human behaviors, said Kyle Voigt, Cruise's CEO and co-founder. This is where the rubber meets the road for realizing the autonomous vision we've been working toward, providing driverless transportation services to everyone safely, affordably, and hands-free. Voigt's company has staked its future on delivering that robotic transit revolution, pouring over $3 billion into research, development, and testing across nearly a decade. The massive startup costs involved with perfecting the artificial intelligence, sensors, computing power, and validation processes has created a high-stakes game with monumental payoffs awaiting whoever can solve the driverless mobility puzzle first at scale. If Cruise can replicate its RoboTaxi service's initial San Francisco rollout to other cities and rapidly increase vehicle fleet sizes while driving down operating costs, it could rapidly take over urban mobility markets worth hundreds of billions. According to one estimate by ARK Investment Management, successful autonomous rideshare platforms displacing nearly all consumer vehicle ownership could generate over $2 trillion in annual revenue within 15 years. Having established an early lead out of the gate in San Francisco through its extensive mapping and real-world operations data, Cruise is aggressively moving to lock down future city expansions before competitors can gain ground. The startup has already secured permits to establish RoboTaxi services next in Seattle, with aims at deploying across many of America's top metro areas within a few years. But the competition is intense and deep-pocketed, as Cruise battles well-capitalized autonomous driving programs from major automakers, big tech behemoths, and ambitious unicorn startups salivating over the same urban mobility opportunity. Currently leading the pack in RoboTaxi testing and deployments alongside Cruise is Google's Waymo unit. Leveraging a decade head start developing self-driving cars through partnerships with automakers, Waymo has already launched limited autonomous ride-sharing services in parts of Phoenix and San Francisco. With Google's vast resources and AI prowess behind it, the company aims to rapidly scale driverless ride-hailing into a nationwide service and potentially franchise its mobility-as-a-service technology out to other companies. While trailing the leaders, there are also rapidly advancing RoboTaxi services stemming from GM's Argo AI, Ford and VW's Argo.ai partnership, Tesla's full self-driving, Amazon's Zoox acquisition, Baidu's Apollo program in China, and a slew of smaller startups racing to deploy their autonomous vehicles through rideshare platforms. There's no denying a colossal multi-industry battle royale is brewing across automated mobility, logistics, and transportation, with robot access and driverless ride-sharing services marking one of the first major battlegrounds. Fortunes will be made and empires forged or broken depending on whose autonomous driving platforms, business models, and user experiences prove most robust and scalable as driverless transit options diffuse into the mainstream. Some analysts predict a bifurcated mobility ecosystem emerging, with elite autonomous taxi fleets operated by deep-pocketed tech giants and automakers using proprietary systems appealing to premium customers. While on the lower end, commoditized robot access services may end up being offered by rideshare aggregators and third-party mobility platforms licensing out retrofitted vehicles from suppliers. Our analysis concludes that while leading autonomous companies like Waymo, Cruise, and others will directly serve high-end parts of the ride-hail market with branded autonomous taxis, they'll also license autonomous driving software to rideshare aggregators servicing lower tiers profitably and ubiquitously, wrote analysts at ARK Investment Management in a research report on disrupting mobility markets. Regardless which autonomous mobility models arise victorious, Cruise's RoboTaxi debut represents a watershed in the transition towards FSD.